About a week ago, I came across a cartoon, and it showed three men with long beards and turban-like headgear standing by a market stall, piled high with gold bullion. And attached to the front of this market stall, there was a sign that read, "Customers who bought this also bought." And then beneath it were two pots, one inscribed frankincense and the other myrrh. And it got me thinking about how we make decisions and choices and how intentional we are with them. Obviously, the cartoon is drawing on the habit of Amazon and other online retailers to use algorithms to suggest other products that might be of interest to us, assuming that our buying habits are like those of previous customers. But I can remember as a child being very puzzled by the gifts the Magi, or kings as I knew them then, had brought. I could understand why they brought gold. Gold was valuable. But what on earth were frankincense and myrrh? Now, I do remember from Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, there is one of the brothers, because their parents wanted all seven boys to be named after characters in the Bible, one of them was named Frank because he smelt nice. But other than that, I hadn't got a clue what they were. But when I did then find out that they were something a bit like perfume, I can tell you I wasn't impressed. Not only did I doubt many boys would want perfume as a present, but to get two gifts that were so alike, well, that was surely bad planning on the part of the kings. And then this further got me thinking about a television program that my wife Andrea and I recently saw. It was about Harrods and comparing it, I think it was to Aldi. And in it, one of the former Harrods employees described the hour before the store would close on Christmas Eve as being called golden hour by the staff, as they could generally sell anything to the customers that arrived during this period. Customers desperate to get gifts, having left their shopping to the last moments before Christmas. Is this what the Magi had done? Had they panicked and so ended up with two of them bringing similar perfumed presents? Of course not. These gifts are not accidental or suggested by some first-century algorithm based on the purchasing habits of previous shoppers. These gifts are intentional, symbolic, as so much of Matthew's gospel is, to emphasize the importance of who Jesus is. Gold, to signify Jesus' majesty as king. Frankincense, not a perfume, but an incense for burning as part of worship, to signify Jesus' divinity. And myrrh, again, not a perfume, but a gum that can be used as an analgesic, but was commonly used to anoint a body and prepare it for burial. Indeed, in John's Gospel, we read that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes when they took Jesus' body to the tomb. These gifts were not rushed purchases, picked up in the final hour before the shops shut, or computer-generated suggestions for those who needed help from previous customers' purchases. They are intentionally selected to symbolize that Jesus is king and divine, whilst recognizing the centrality of his death to his ministry. But this is not the only intentionality in today's gospel. Just as in Luke's account, where the visitors are shepherds to show that Jesus has come for those living at the edges of society, Matthew tells us about visitors coming from the east. These are Gentiles, not Jews, and yet they recognize the significance of the birth of this child. By telling us about them, Matthew is pointing that though born as a Jew to Jewish parents, Jesus has come to be King of the Jews and Gentiles alike. Right at the start of his account, Matthew is intentional in the visitors he includes in his account. And this is mirrored at the end of his gospel, where we have the Great Commission, with Jesus intentionally instructing his followers to go and make disciples of all nations, and not to keep the good news only for the Jews. And he is also intentional in pointing out that this new king is different to other kings. The Magi assume that if this baby is born to be a great king, well, surely he'll be born in a palace, and so understandably go to seek him there, meeting with the current king of Judah, King Herod, a king appointed by the Romans, hated by the local Jewish population, and so insecure in his position that he kills his own sons, wives, and others because he's scared they're plotting against him. That's an account from Josephus, not from the Bible. And as we know, if we continue to read the rest of chapter 2, this Herod sets out to try to ensure that this new king, of whom the Magi speak, will not survive beyond his second birthday, when he orders the killing of all males under the age of 2. Herod's is not an enduring kingdom. His is one built on material wealth and the authority of others. Instead of being born in a palace, Matthew tells us that the Magi find the new king in an oikia, the Greek word for an ordinary house, home, or dwelling. Now, as an aside, Luke tells us that there was no room in the kataluma, the Greek word for guest room, or even sometimes dining room. And so many scholars think that for some privacy whilst giving birth, Mary opted to move to the lower part of the house, the place where the animals are kept. And so that's why Luke mentions the manger or feeding trough being used as a bed. But time has now passed, possibly up to 2 years, since Herod instructed the killing of boys 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time of the birth he had learned from the Magi. And so maybe there is more room in the human part of the house for Mary and the baby, with the busyness of the census registration having passed. Matthew still intentionally contrasts this new king with the false King Herod by having the Magi first visit the palace, only to realize that what they seek is not to be found where the money is. Surely the angel or the dream that warned the Magi to return home by a different road could have warned them before they visited the palace, and so alerted Herod to the birth of this new king. But that would not have fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies. And this brings me to another aside. Note that Matthew suggests that Herod is not familiar with the detail of these prophecies, and so has to ask the chief priests and the teachers of the law to tell him what they say about the place of the birth. Or perhaps Herod did know, but this device gives Matthew the opportunity of making it clear to us that Jesus is these prophecies' fulfillment by quoting from Micah chapter 5, a reading some of you might recognize from carol services. Matthew is intentional in pointing to Herod's apparent ignorance of Scripture so that he, Matthew, can make it clear to us by quoting from Micah. And a little later in chapter 2, Matthew will again quote from what we call the Old Testament, this time from Jeremiah, when he describes the weeping caused by the slaughter of the innocents. Indeed, this is a feature of Matthew's gospel, repeated references and allusions to what we call the Old Testament, with frequent quotations from it. Just as the gifts brought by the Magi are not accidental but intentional, just as the visit by the Magi to Herod is not accidental but intentional, Matthew's use of Scripture is not accidental but intentional. All these intentionally show us that Jesus is a fulfillment of the promises of Scripture. And I want to challenge you to also be intentional as we celebrate Epiphany, or as the Book of Common Prayer also calls it, the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles. Many scholars see Matthew's Gospel as being a call for Jewish followers of Christ to share the good news with Gentiles, hence the prominence of Gentiles in its opening and its closing. This is something that would have been anathema to them. Their understanding of the law was that they should keep themselves separate. We see this in stories such as the Good Samaritan in Luke. But here Matthew is basing his gospel firmly in Jewish scripture and saying that Jesus has come for the Gentiles as well. This is not accidental. This is intentional. And at the end of his account, as I mentioned, we have the Great Commission. Go out and tell everyone the good news, not just the Jewish people, but all nations. And because people responded to this, Christianity came to this part of Europe we call Britain. Because of this, someone told someone, who told someone, who told someone, all the way to each one of us being told the good news that this baby's birth is for each and every one of us. And so, my challenge for you this Epiphany time, how intentionally are we going to respond to this good news? This Epiphany time, how are we going to go in peace to love and serve the Lord? What is your intention?
Notice time, everyone. Sit up straight, please, and listen. So, remember that every Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, we do have a Holy Communion service here with tea and coffee afterwards. So please do come along and join us on a Thursday morning. And at 4 p.m. on a Friday, there's a time when a group of people meet for prayer. That's at 4 o'clock. Now, the weather's lovely today. It's not raining. Well, it wasn't when I came in. There's a walk this afternoon, which is meeting here at church at 2 p.m. It's a circular walk of 4.5 miles for the option of a shorter walk, though. So just speak to Carol or Michael when you get here, or give them a ring, and join that this afternoon. Sparklers is back for our parents, grandparents, toddlers, babies tomorrow. So please do encourage all those people, or come along yourself. Have a cup of tea, have some coffee, and delicious cakes and biscuits that are always available. It would be lovely to see you. And a plea, please, the food bank. They have sent a list of things that they really need. These are just a couple of things. It was on the weekly email update. Pasta sauce is required, chocolate biscuits, and I'm sure we've all got plenty of those, actually, that really we shouldn't be eating now. So I encourage you to donate those. Deodorant, male, female deodorant, and household cleaners. Please do drop them in the box at the side there, and we'll ensure that they're taken to the food bank. That's it. Hold on. That's it, Sally, isn't it? Yes. So that's all the notices. So